Hello, greetings everyone. This is Jyoti Dodia, and I'm really pleased to have you attend this Power Systems technical webinar series, PowerVug session. And today I'm delighted to have Dawn May back with us after quite a long time. Dawn is no stranger to the PowerVug series. She has delivered sessions in the past and had worked for IBM for many years. She's now an independent consultant, and I'm really pleased to have her with us today. So without any further ado, let me hand over to you, Dawn, if you'd like to introduce yourself and the session.
All right, well, thank you for the introduction. I think you said the key things. I think many of you know I had a great career with IBM. I really wanted to get out into the wild, real world of helping clients with their systems and helping them troubleshoot and make their systems work better. It's a very exciting thing to do. And one of the things that I've been doing is also helping with implementation projects with the Administration Runtime Expert. And this session is really going to cover everything you need to know about the Administration Runtime Expert. Hopefully I'll get through the material within the 90 minutes. But if there's any questions during this presentation, please enter them into the chat window, and we'll take the questions as we go along and make this interactive if there's some really good things that you would like to know more about or talk about. I am going to start with a few slides, and then I'm going to do most of this session via demonstration mode. I have sent in the presentation PDF, so the PDF will be available. So you'll have reference a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about in demonstration mode. So first of all, what is the Administration Runtime Expert? Well, it consists of two parts, which I'll talk about in a little bit more in a couple slides ahead. But it basically is a function of the IBM I operating system with a graphical user interface that allows you to identify what attributes you want to ensure are consistent. So what do you want to make sure that hasn't changed, or be notified if it has changed, so you don't have to manually go inspect everything to figure it out. And it allows you to define what those attributes are and what you care about. Then it allows you to run a verification on those attributes to see if they have or have not changed. It provides reports of these verifications, so you can store the reports and have them for an extended period of time. There are a subset of errors that you can automatically correct. And then it also allows you to do some additional things like distribute and apply PTFs. And everything that I've talked about here can be done to an individual system, or it can be done to groups of systems. And then finally, because of the architecture of the Administration Runtime Expert, it's got this plugin architecture, you can extend the functionality of what IBM provides with your own custom plugins. And this allows you to have the Administration Runtime Expert validate anything and everything that you want. And I'll provide some examples of what you can do with plugins at the end of the session. So why would you want to use ARE? We typically call it ARE to make it easier to spit out rather than the long name. Well, you might want to be able to easily identify things that have changed. So, you're running along in your business environment and everything is going great. We all know something happens, you have a problem. And then you ask, well, what changed? And everybody says, nothing changed. Well, we know something had to change if you have a problem that shows up. And the Administration Runtime Expert, if you set these templates up and have things identified from a known good environment, and then run it against something when it breaks, you can, if you have got a good template set up, you'll be able to quickly see, oh, this is what changed. This might be related to the problem that we're having. This can be done on a single partition, an individual partition, or you could do this across groups of partitions as well. And if you have an environment where you have multiple partitions, you may want to ensure that they're consistent. Maybe you have an application that is spread across several partitions and you want to make sure that certain things are identical across them. Environmental settings or the application itself, maybe your security settings. You can ensure consistency across groups of partitions. And in the IBMI world, being business computing, you often have to worry about compliance and auditing. You could set up templates using ARE for things like security attributes, authority attributes, security system values, all these things that you maybe need to track and audit. ARE can help you define you can define templates with ARE to identify these security related attributes and run reports, and you have a way to store all of these reports over time that you can prove that nothing has changed. And so it's a great way to demonstrate consistency from an audit and compliance perspective. You can ensure PTF consistency, and we'll talk about PTFs later, but both ensuring PTFs are the same, installed across partitions, they're the same. Of course, that is release dependent, but you can distribute PTFs to your endpoints and optionally load and apply PTFs. In my discussions with people out in the real business computing world, the use of ARE to load and apply PTFs is probably limited, but we'll talk more about that later. And then perhaps you have a test environment and a production environment. And if you want to, maybe you're debugging a problem and you want to make sure that your test application attributes are exactly the same as the application attributes that you have in your production environment. My programs are the same levels, my files are the same levels, probably can't verify the data, but you can make sure the application itself are the same and then try to test and debug problems in a different environment to help make sure those environments are consistent. ARE can help you validate that. And the use cases go on and on. Whatever you might want to do for checking values and making sure they're saying this have not changed, or being getting a report that that identifies what has changed, ARE can do all of these things, and it's very helpful for these kinds of situations. So briefly, the kinds of attributes that can be verified. On this screen, this is what comes with the ARE console, the kinds of things that are built into the web interface that you can set up. You can verify application attributes, what objects, do they exist, what authorities do they have, many attributes of the objects. You can look at configuration files and making sure certain configuration parameters are as expected. Products and PTFs, you can do some things with network, TCP/IP configuration. Well, I'm not going to walk through this. We will go through in the demo and look at each of these and the kinds of attributes that you can verify. So let's start with an architectural overview of ARE. A key component to using ARE is the central system, which I have identified here in the middle. The central system is where you install the ARE product. And that is where the ARE console or the web interface runs. The central system is where you define and build the templates that you're going to use to verify attributes. And it is also where you will schedule your verification. That's where the reports are stored. So everything is stored in this central system. And then you can use ARE to validate other systems or other partitions. These could be just a single partition. They could be groups of systems. So in this example, I've set up one individual system, but I've set up 3 system groups. And within these groups, you can have multiple partitions. You may want to have groups for partitions by release, but you don't have to. It depends upon what you're going to be verifying. The partitions could be at all different releases depending upon the exact attributes. But the central system is a really key system. This central system must be in a really good state, because a lot of the attributes that are verified, the initial settings are pulled from the central system. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward.
Dawn, there's a question which you may be about to answer, and that is, how do we get ARE?
And that was a perfect lead into this next slide that I just put up. Of course, you have to make sure ARE is installed, and ARE consists of 2 parts. First, there is a product, 5733 ARE. This is a release independent product, so there is not a specific update or version by release. That's why it's got the 5733 number. This product is only required to be on that central system. This product provides the graphical user interface, the ARE console, the template deployment editor. And so you need this product where you want to use that graphical interface. Okay, so if we go back to this prior slide I had, this box in pink, the ARE Central System, this is where you would install 5733 ARE. It does not need to be installed on these endpoints that you're going to verify. Now, if you wanted to use the console on one of these endpoints, then yes, you would need to install the product. So the second part of ARE, in the IBM documentation, they call it the ARE core. I tend to call it the runtime. This is installed as part of the base operating system. Okay, so there's the ARE software that you need to actually validate the endpoint. So if you go back to this screen again and we look at these system groups, these endpoints that you're doing the verifications on, the ARE core is automatically, it's part of the base operating system. And so you need nothing else on these endpoint systems. In addition, with 5733 ARE, there is no charge. There's no additional charge for this product. It comes with your operating system software products that come with the system. It may not be installed. You might have to go out to the entitled software site to download it and get it, but there is no charge for it. And so, as I said, ARE only needs to be installed on the partitions where you're going to use the graphical interface. And we'll go through, in the demo mode, we'll show it and what you can do with it. And the GUI is used to create and edit your deployment templates, which define the attributes that you're going to verify. It's used to set up your system groups that you will do the verifications on. You can use manual verifications through the GUI. You can schedule automated verifications. And all of the reports are also stored on the central system. So if we look at this little graphic I had built, if you go out and run a verification on system group 2, there will be a report for each system or each partition in that group. The report is actually stored back here on the central system. So you can just log into the central system, go to that group, look at the results of the verification and see the reports. So you don't have to go out to the endpoints to look at the results. It's all there on the central system for you. And we'll talk about fixed actions as we go through the demo as well. So the ARE runtime engine, or the ARE core, it's just a set of Java classes that are shipped with the operating system. And it's shipped as part of the base operating system. I've already said this, a little bit of repeat here. When you do have to install that for 5733 ARE on the partition that you want as the central system. You do need to open up some ports. On the central system, when you log into the console, it uses port 12401. And ARE, the central system, communicates to the endpoint systems using the host servers. So you're the remote command server, the database server, the file server, network print server, those servers. So you do need to have the host server ports open on your endpoint systems. I don't think that's a challenge for most of us because those host server ports are used by a lot of things. You know, for example, ACS, you need to have those open. The ARE console runs as a web application server. So when you start, you need to start the application server. You just start the TCP server. It's an HTTP server, and it's called IBM ARE, and it will run in the Q HTTP server subsystem. If you're going to be using ARE, you will want to set this up as an auto start server so you don't forget that you have to start it all the time. And then to log into the web interface, you know, it's very similar to Navigator for I. You just put your system name and you use the port 12401/ARE, and you will be presented with a sign-on prompt. And then when you log in, you're presented with the template deployment editor. For completeness, in this box to the right, there are a set of dependencies that are needed for the ARE installation. And you've got the list of the dependent products that you also need to have installed in order to run the console. Now, when you use ARE, the user interface does require a powerful user profile, all object special authority. And you really do want to limit how many people have all object special authority. When you're building a template, you can get at any system resource and do validation. So you're accessing a lot of important information through this console. So that's the requirement for all object. But there is a way that you can use permissions. So you use the web administration for I with the IBM ARE web server, and you can add permissions to allow non-powerful user profiles to create templates or run verifications. And this just has the screen captures on how you get into editing the permissions to grant these authorities. And here's another slide. There are two options. You can give up someone an operator authority, which basically allows them to manage the server. So from a permissions perspective for using ARE, if you do not have a powerful profile, you give them developer authority, which allows someone to build a template. All right. So creating your first template. It's at this point, I'm going to exit the presentation. And I'm going to go over into demonstration mode. So hopefully now you're seeing the web interface.
Yes.
Okay, great.
There is a quick question, a couple of questions. In fact, I think one you answered already. But one, can a system have membership of two groups, i.e. security group and performance group?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but let me interpret it from what I heard. So when you set up system groups, and we'll show system groups, I'm limited in my demo because of my environment. You could set up, let's say you wanted to set up a security group and that had partition A, B, C, and you wanted to set up a group for performance validation, and that could be B, C, D. So a system, a partition can be a member of any multiple different groups within ARE. Hopefully that was the question and that was the correct answer.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
No, nothing I
Okay.
can see at the moment. Just a reminder to participants, if you have questions, just enter them into the chat window and select to everyone, please, so I can monitor it. Thank you.
So when you sign in, you're presented with the deployment template editor. This is the interface where you build your templates, which basically the template is the selection of the attributes you want to verify and the values those attributes are expected to have. I have this template, it's pre-built, called Dawn Demo, that's very extensive, and I'm going to use this to walk through examples rather than creating new. I've got some created and we'll walk through each of those. And when you go in here, the first time when you don't have anything, the first thing you will do is use the create button, and you'll create a new template, and it pre-fills the name. You'll want to give it a meaningful name. In the projects that I've worked with, the question about, security versus performance types of attributes, that's exactly how we tend to approach it. What are the types of attributes that I want to verify? Maybe it's a system health template, maybe it's a security template, maybe it's a performance template, maybe it's an application template. You want to kind of name your templates so that they're reflective of the types of attributes that you want to verify. Now, my example here, the demo one, is a mishmash of everything, and this is not how I would do it in the real world. I would want to isolate different attributes based upon the types of verifications that I want to do, and then schedule them separately, because then it's going to make understanding, or not necessarily understanding, but managing your reporting a little bit more granular as opposed to everything all logged together. But for demonstration purposes, we'll use this one, and we're going to go into edit it. So once you have a template that exists, you can copy it. And actually the Dawn Demo Simple is a copy of the other one, and I've simplified some of the things in there. You can delete them, you can edit them, you can export them. So you have a template that you created on one system, you could export it from a system and import it into a different partition, a different central system if you wanted to copy them around. You can rename them, and then you can just simply test them, which is a verification to see how everything is working. View log, we'll come back to this, is how you can see what happened when you last built it, but we don't want to skip ahead. So we're going to go into edit. Now, when you go into edit mode, on your very first template, when you create a new one, all of these sections will be collapsed. These sections are expanded when you have attributes that you have, when you have used one of these plugins. So each of these are called plugins, and that's kind of the architecture of ARE. Every type of attribute that you can verify is a plugin, and that gets to the point of custom plugins that we'll talk about later on. You're just extending it with the same architecture that ARE uses. Now, we're not going to walk through everything, but we will go through most of them. So let's take a look at file and directory attributes. For file and directory attributes, these are, things like you can see here for IFS data, it's basically, does it exist? Well, let's just go into and look at it. It's clear if we go into and look at it. When you go into IFS, you're presented with the root directory tree. The first time you come in here, you're going to have to navigate to find what you want to verify, and you can go through the whole tree. Well, once you have something selected, there's this nice collection only view. And this is looking at this, it's taking all the things that aren't in your template that you're not verifying. And so you can see I've gone to my home directory. I have within my .m directory, I have a directory called data. Now, I built this template some time ago, and this is just, I keep this one, I don't change this one for this particular reason, is I had a directory in the .m home, in my home directory named data. And this was where I had done some work with various IBM services, getting data, putting data into CSV files so that I could analyze it off the system. Well, this directory got deleted. And so you see all these red X's. The template editor knows that this does not exist anymore, and so they're flagged as red X's. Well, so the first time you build it, they're going to be there, they'll all be green, you're going to verify the attributes. So I'm verifying the size, when it was last modified, put the CSID in there, you could add creation date. These are the only attributes you can verify within the IFS. But so when you build the template, it pulls the information from the central system. So when I initially built this template, this data directory existed. Well, I have subsequently deleted it, but I have not rebuilt this particular plugin, and ARE knows that these are gone. And so when I do the verification, I'm going to get errors because these don't exist. And so you can see that in your template editor. If I wanted to add some additional information, I could go look at and add in more files and directories if I wanted to. I'm going to leave this one the same because I like keeping this one where I've got the data that's been deleted. And my screen is made large, so I have to scroll to the bottom so I can cancel out of here. But let's take a look at library attributes. And so when you go into library attributes, again, if you have nothing in here, you will be presented with the option to enter the library name that you want to look at. So again, I'm looking at my .m library. No surprise, it's filled with performance data. But we can do, again, the collection view only. So the library has a lot of just files in it, but I'm not verifying all those files. I'm only looking at my subsystem descriptions that I've got in my .m library. I don't want my subsystem description objects to be changed. I don't want anyone changing my class or my job descriptions, my subsystem descriptions, for example. So these are all the objects that I am verifying. And I'm looking, again, existence and size, creation type. But with objects in qsys.lib, you've got the option to take these additional attributes, and you click on this, and this is essentially a super duper display object description. So if you look at the options under common, these are a lot of the things that you can see from a display object description, the details that you can get at. So here I've got the object saved, date, and time. So maybe I want to know that object has been saved and that time is changing. So you can get to any of these common attributes. And then depending upon the object type, there's additional attributes. So here, if it's a library, I can go select all these different attributes that are unique or specific to a library. And so this gets into when I talked earlier about application attributes. I want to make sure Here's my program. Here's all my program information. I don't ever want to I want to make sure the program owner never changes. So I would be able to select program owner and run a report. And if the program owner ever changes, that could be a severe, could be an error situation that I want to know about, and ARE could put that into the report. So the sky's the limit here. Any attribute that you can get at on your objects, you can verify with ARE. So this is very, very powerful. Within files and directories, libraries and files, there is an advanced object option, and this gets into providing some flexibility for if you're in the IFS, the directories that are collected, maybe you want to limit how deep you go, and there's ability to put in variables for path names. So maybe you want to verify something for every web server, but the path name can vary because of the web server name. You have the ability to use variables so you can code it, simplify the definition once, and then be able to run it based upon the variables. All right, so we'll cancel out of this. And so that's the file and directory attributes. And I'm going to cancel out because I didn't really change anything. And when you cancel, you always get this little okay. Then you have file and directory authorities. So very similar to attributes, but specific focus on authorities. So if we go look at the first one, I want to mention this. When you go in and add a verification, it always gives you a collection name. And if you forget to name it, it uses the default collection name. I don't like using the default collection name, so we'll look at the collection view only, and we're looking at just a subset of files. So we'll just call it Dawn M objects. And so give it a real name. And here I'm looking, and we're going to verify this list of authority attributes for these objects. And then we go okay, because we're going to change the name of the collection. And if we look at this one, this is IFS. So similar kind of thing. I've got a file in the IFS. It's a test plugin I wrote, and the attributes, the authority attributes that you can verify on the IFS. So again, from a security compliance perspective, if you want to make sure authorities aren't being changed, you can set up ARE to verify what these authority attributes are and get reports if they have been changed. Configuration files. So this first set is really geared towards applications, right? Objects and authorities, and now we have configuration files. Configuration files allow you to identify a configuration file. And the configuration file is typically key and then key value pairs. So I'm just looking at the HTTPD configuration file from a web server I have configured on this system. And I'll add another one in to show you how you do it. But basically, you navigate to the file, the configuration file in the IFS. And once you select the file, ARE automatically takes these key value pairs and shows you what you've got in here. And in this particular web server, I've configured it to run in my own subsystem, so I can see my HTTP directives for doing the subsystem configuration, and I can see over here how I have these set. Now in this particular example, it would have pulled in Dawn May JQ. You can go in and edit each of these, and I wanted to just override the default setting, so it pulls the configuration values that are on the central system in this configuration file. I wanted to contrive the test so I can go in and edit it, and instead of just having it be my job queue, I appended BAD at the end for demonstration purposes because it doesn't exist. You also have the ability to report only, so you just put the value in the report. Maybe you want a record of what it is, but you don't necessarily want warning, error, information, details about it, or you can verify the value. When you verify the value, in this particular case, it's a string, I can say it equals, I could say, oh, it must start with this, it ends with, so you've got all sorts of types of verifications that you can build in, all part of the GUI, makes it very easy to do. And then you can also assign a severity. The default is error, but maybe I only want this to be a warning, or maybe I want it to be informational. I can also specify that it must match case. And so very, very powerful configuration capabilities to what that expected value should be. But this one I changed just so we could force an error. And so we'll do okay. But let's go ahead and add a new one here. And as I said, we get presented with the IFS. And I have an example where I want to go down to, because I want to show you something important. Okay, so here we are in the www directory. And you can see that's the configuration file I pulled in. I want to go down to Zend. So we have Zend PHP installed on this system. I'm going to pick the fast CGI configuration file. And then I click OK. And then I want to go update it. Now, in this particular case, what ARE is requiring is a key value pair per line. So on the HTTP configuration file, each key followed by its value was on a different line. With this Zend configuration file, this fast CGI configuration file, all of these expected values are on the same line. And so it comes in, that line starts with server, and then here's all the key value pairs. Never fear, this is still going to work. So you can go in and edit this, and now we can go in and we just edit in here on what the expected values are. I know from some experience with performance that perhaps the number of CGI children that you need, the fast CGI children needs to be increased. We can see here it's at the default of 10. We could go in and edit this and make it 20. And we'll make this give me a warning if that error occurs. And so even though the format isn't what ARE maybe prefers, it still will work and you still can do the verifications. And then we click OK. And when this runs, since the value that exists on the central system is 10, if we do the verification, we're going to get a warning because I changed that setting to 20 in the configuration file. And then we just do OK, and then we now have added a new configuration file to our template. And click OK. Finally, for files and directories, we have the resource collector. The resource collector is very powerful if you want to collect data for diagnostics. If you ever open a ticket with IBM support, they have you go in and run all these must gather tools, and then you send that data into IBM. The concept is sort of the same, where I have an application problem, or maybe whatever your problem may be. I know I want to pull back some error logs from that endpoint system. Or maybe I need to pull back some objects or a file in a library. You can do this with the resource collector. You go in, and the first thing you need to give it, if you're getting files in the IFS, they will be put in a zip file. So they give the name of the zip file, and you can specify specific files. So here you just put the full path name of the file that you want to collect. You know, do I want to keep the path? What's my error level for that one? But in my case, it's like, no, I'm just going to collect files in a specified directory. And so I had this directory where I collected all my data. Let's say that's where I put my error logs. I'm going to say, let's collect all the data in this directory. I'm going to include all the subtrees. So if there's subdirectories in there, I'm going to pull that all in. I could filter. Let's say I only wanted log files. So you could add a way to filter in here so you only pull back the specific file names in that directory. And again, like keeping your path and the severity level. And then when this resource collector runs, the files that are in this directory will be put into this zip file. And then you can also do save objects. So you can enter a save command to save whatever you want to save, lib save object, into a save file. This save file must exist, okay? So you can't create it on the fly from here, but it does need to exist. So you need to make sure you have an existing save file, because ARE will clear that save file and then issue the save command to put it into that save file. So great way to bring data back automatically if you want to pull data back from the endpoint systems. I've run into a problem. Actually, I've seen this happen a couple times. If the zip file already exists, I've seen where creating the new zip file essentially goes into a loop. I haven't talked to anybody at IBM about this yet, so I'm actually going to remove this from I'm going to remove this data resource collector, because when I tested this yesterday, this went into a loop that I had to manually um, cancel. So I am going to just remove this from my collection because I don't want that to happen during our demo today, but I need to check up on that one. Okay, so we'll get out of here. And so now we don't have any resource collector in this template. I'm going to skip over, well, software requirements. I want to come back to that later about PTFs. I want to do that separately. This one, the network configuration, I highly recommend that you put the network configuration checker in at least one template that you do. Maybe it's a basic, let's make sure everything is good. This network configuration checker runs the ARE network health checker. That network health checker is one of the first things I always run when I work with a client, because I have discovered far too frequently that there are DNS configuration errors that really lead to performance problems. And this network configuration checker will identify any network configuration problems that you have, including DNS errors. So I really recommend that you always run this and make sure what you get back here is expected and good, because if there are network configuration problems, it's something you definitely want to correct as soon as possible. And then the next one is ports. This simply allows you to verify whether ports are in use or if they should be not in use. So on my little simple verification, I'm making sure port 21, 22, 8470, and 8471 are in use. If those are not in use, and basically this means there's a server job listening on those ports. If they're not in use, I want to be notified that these aren't available. I can't remember. There's a little bit of things that might be problematic. If you've got a chicken and egg thing going on here, if the port's not in use, you might not be able to use ARE on that endpoint system, particularly for the host server ports. So you know, got to be aware of what the ports requirements are. If they're not in use, that would be problematic. And then restricted port ranges, this is simply the ability to have ARE validate that when you do config TCP, you can set up a restricted port range. This allows ARE to validate that restricted port range. In all of these, there's an edit XML button. So you've got the GUI. Under the covers, everything is stored in XML files in the IFS. I'm not going to go into the details of where they're stored. That's a topic beyond today's little discussion, but they're all in the IFS. And you can see here's my XML, and so it's looking for port number 21, it's looking for in use, and you could go edit this XML. I can go edit it, and I can customize this. So I could go in here and I could just copy this and paste it and add another port number, so I don't have to use the GUI. Depending upon the types of changes you make in the XML, so it's just, you know, you can copy this in, we can go and we can paste it. And let's just and we'll add in 8174, and then we can click preview, we can see what it looks like, and we can say okay. And now obviously I made a typo of some sort because it doesn't like the XML. Is it because I'm indented here wrong? And then you could say okay, and it doesn't like it, so we're going to cancel out of it. I'm not sure what I did wrong. I don't see an error that's obvious, but we'll just cancel. But you can edit the XML directly. If you do edit XML, depending on the changes that you make, you may not ever be able to use the GUI on it again. You might be restricted to always editing that particular verification via the XML. I have not yet found a reason to edit XML directly. Basically, doing things through the GUI has been good enough, but just know that that is an option that the product has. And we're going to cancel out of this one.
Dawn?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. There is a question that has come in, and the question is, ARE requires everything to be customized manually for what we want to configure for changes, or do we have any standard default deployment settings which will just start recording changes by default?
There are no default templates provided with the product. So you have to go in and create them from scratch. Now that said, that presents an interesting opportunity because templates can be exported. You know, one of the things that maybe I could look at doing in the future is I could provide a standard, here's my basic environment template. You know, you work with me and you can export this, you can import it in, and you don't have to start from scratch because that edit and import and exit export capability exists. As far as I know, no one's done that to date. And what comes with the product, you are starting from scratch.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions was, are there any ARE templates available online? And I think you've just
I
answered
am
that.
not aware of any, but that does, I hadn't really thought about doing that, but that might be an interesting way to help people get started.
Yeah, perhaps it could be done via the IBMI community,
Yep.
where you could share, you know, users can share their own or pick up what somebody else has shared.
Yep.
And then there was a little hint about, you know, you were cancelled out of your previous demo bit. Vince believes it was /port was missing in one of the
Okay.
so
Thank you. You know, it's
no
easier when
worries.
you're watching than when you're speaking. It's like,
Yes,
what did I do wrong?
I know exactly how you feel when I used to do these things. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about the system environment. And this is where we get into looking at what you've got configured and how your system is set up. And this was where the fun really starts to come into play. Um, we'll start off with system values and network attributes. This is pretty straightforward. I really recommend separating. So you could go in there and have one little collection that verifies all your network attributes and all your system values. That's great, but I would like to see them subdivided because then if something goes wrong, I don't have to, you know, what's my long list and where's my problems in the detailed report. So here I did one specifically for network attributes. I'm looking at the audit system values, looking at some password system values, and then just the generic system values. So if you go look at the QAuth system values, and we can take this update, you can see what I've done is I just positioned to the QAUD and I put them all in here. When you add a system value, it pulls the expected values from what that system value is set to on the central system. Okay, so that's how they're primed. You can go in here and edit it and you can change it. Maybe you want it to be a different setting and you'll get an error on that central system. And again, like I showed before, you can report or verify and you can specify the warnings. And so we'll cancel out of this one and we'll just go into this generic system value one. And this is just one. So here's an example of, oh, just system values. Well, these really aren't maybe the good system values. Maybe I want to make it job system values. And oh, well, maybe query degree doesn't belong in that particular one. But we can see system values related to jobs and job log size. Well, his log size isn't matching, but I'll just keep it in there, for example. So you can group them for better, more granularity in your reporting. And as I said, you can edit it and they'll pull in from the current system. And again, you can go in and edit XML just like we showed before. And one thing I haven't talked about yet is test. So there is a test button on many of these template editors. So we'll select the job system value and we click test. And what this does is it's doing a little verification. Whoops, where did it go? Oh, it opened up the report. I want to close this window. I want to actually, I've moved it to where am I at here? Can I move it? It doesn't want to let me, there we go. So it opens it up in a new window and it gives me these return codes. The return code 70, it's not documented anywhere but through trial and error. Return code 70 means you have some errors. 60 tells you you've got warnings. 50 is info, and if there's no error, it's successful. And from here, then in testing this, I can go look at my summary report, which then it downloads it, and I can click on it, And it should show, hopefully it shows up in a tiny font for you, and it just shows you that I had one error. Oh, the actual value for job message queue max is 64, the expected is 16. This is just one of my little personal opinions. I don't like giant job logs because you can end up taking up a lot of disk space unexpectedly if you have too many of them. So I made job message queue max 16, and the system is actually set to 64, so I get an error. And that's where my error came from. You can also look at your detailed report, and we'll show how you look at these through the console in a bit, but we do get all of these summary and detailed reports. And the detailed report shows you all of the system values that were checked, what their settings are, and then pointing out errors or infos or whatever it may be. So a nice way, I like testing, and I like to recommend testing as you're building a template, because it's a quick way to see if things are working as expected, as opposed to building it and then going in and iterate back and forth between the console to test and edit. So it's a nice way to do the verification without coming out of the template editor. And we'll click OK because I did make some change there. Environment variables, I'm going to skip in terms of time, but it's just the same kind of thing as system values, just for environment variables. We can also check user profiles. And so in mine, I have a little collection called Dawn user profiles, because I happen to have a whole bunch of user profiles that begin with Dawn on this system. And when you verify user profiles, what ARE, the template editor here, allows you to do is just verify these attributes. Now you can customize, and you can remove the ones if you don't want to verify it. You can remove them. You can add in the numbers, although the numbers probably aren't very, user ID numbers and group numbers probably aren't very interesting to verify. But you get the default set. When you verify user profiles, this is one area where ARE allows you to automatically fix problems with the user profiles. So if you verify it and it finds errors, there's an auto fix, or you can click a button and it'll go change the user profile to be the attributes that you expect. And so basically what happens is when you set this up, it pulls the attributes in from the existing system. If the user profile gets changed, so it has a different attribute at some future point, then you run the template again from when you originally created it, it will identify the errors, the things that have changed, and allow you to correct certain things. But that you'll see, as you see, the list of attributes there are not everything on a user profile. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Now here's where the real fun begins. So the template editor has these things where it shows you and you get to pick and choose. With scripts and commands and the SQL Query Verifier, you can do anything that you can do via CL command, a command via Q shell, or SQL. So scripts and commands, this is just doing like a work disk status. So we'll go look at Q shell work disk status, and I have a reason for doing things via Q shell or CL commands. So in this particular example, I like to put in front whether I'm using Q shell or CL because they're both in the same template. So I'm using Q shell, just using system work disk status. What happens when you use Q shell is it executes the work disk status command. It executes this command. Well, the output from this goes to standard out. And so then I can go look at the verification of the results, and I can see I'm looking at standard out, and I'm looking for any of these bad things. If I'm seeing degraded or failed, hardware failed, power loss, these are all bad things that you can get at with work disk status. If you're on a green screen F11, you get that additional column. I do not want to see any of these errors in my report. So for each of these errors, I added an item, and I want does not contain. I do not want to see degraded. I do not want to see failed. I do not want to see unprotected. And then if any of these happen, I'm going to get an error in my verification. And so via the CL command now, I can get and verify my disk status to make sure I don't have any issues with disk. Now, IBM keeps making this easier and easier with the IBM iServices, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. but this is an example of doing something via a command. Now you could do this via a CL command, but when you do it via CL command, it goes to a spooled file. Okay, the output will go to a spooled file. In my experience with working with ARE, I find it much easier to parse and set up error checking in standard out than dealing with the spooled file output. Just my preference. I think if you do this much, you'll find the same conclusion, that looking at the output in standard out is easier than having ARE go back to the spooled file that's generated, because all this stuff runs in batch. So when you run something in Q shell, it's going to, start a Q shell thing, and then it has its little command that runs, and you parse the standard out. If you run a CL command, ARE actually submits a job to batch to run that, and then when you do something like work to status, it then sends the output to a spooled file. And then you can see on here, I have experimented. So here's my, I did this with work sys status. I've got a CL work sys status and a shell work disk status. And just looking at the output, that's how I gained my experience with preferring to use Q shell for these kinds of things. What's my call program? Yeah, so you can just call a program if you wanted to. So when you do, shells and commands, one of the commands is a call command. So you could call a program from here. You can call one program. You cannot put a series of programs in here. And so you can only set up the one thing that you want to do, but it allows you to check on things. And so this command, this little thing, just puts a message out that says CPF 9898, and I'm looking for that message. Very trivial, contrived example, but just to demonstrate you can do anything you want. And so shells and commands, powerful. Where things get really, really fun. I love this. SQL Query. Yes.
Can we just take a couple of questions before you move on to the next bit? So when you run the report for a group of endpoints, the report runs on the central system by pulling information on each of these systems? That was the question. Does the report run on the central system and pulls information from each of the endpoints?
Okay, so when you run a verification, and let's just take the work disk status command again. When a verification is run, let's say you have a group with systems A, B, and C in it. ARE will send when you build the template, it actually builds a jar file. It will send that jar file to each of the endpoint systems and then execute that jar file. And that's where when I talked about the ARE runtime engine, that's another set of jar files that exist on the endpoints. And it uses host servers to communicate. So if I'm doing a CL command, I'm going to use the remote command server, and the remote command server will execute the command that is called, and it runs on the endpoint system. All of this is running on each endpoint. And then after it has run, ARE collects the output. It'll collect the standard output from a shell command. If you run a CL command, it'll collect the output, it'll collect the job log, and it'll collect the any spooled files that might be created. And then it generates the report. Now the report is actually on the central system, but these artifacts do come back from each endpoint and are part of a zip file that is saved on the central system. So things are executed, the verification is executed on each endpoint, but all of the information is returned to the central system and the report resides on the central system.
Okay, and does it compare values with the central system or with a definition in the template?
So when you create the template, the values that it primes them with come from the central system. And so they're part of the built template, that jar file that gets sent over. And when it executes with the values that are in the template at that time. Now, so take, for example, let's say we're verifying system values, and I created my template on my system values on April 1st. it will have a snapshot of what those system values were on April 1st in the template. If the system value changes on the central system, but you have not rebuilt the template will still have the system value settings from April 1st. And so if things change on the central system, you have to rebuild your template to pick up those changes. And so they're integrated into the template. And then when you run the template, it will, so if I created the template on April 1st, when I run that template, if I use that template for verification on April 21st, it is using the values that were built on April 1st. Regardless if things have changed on the central system, you have to rebuild the template to pick up changes.
Right. And then is there a process to send emails to specific users on errors found in ARE?
Yes, there is. And I will talk about doing email and how you set that up when we get into the verification. And I see
And scheduling is the next question, which was, can you schedule a set of validations to run in the morning and send a report by email?
and yes, you can. And I will get to those as we get to the console, which is going to come up very quickly. I'm almost done with the template editor.
Okay.
So yes, there is the ability to schedule. There's we'll talk about that when we get to the verification part.
Okay. One last one that's just come in. How do we do this when the system A is supposed to be different from the central system?
So you can set up expectations that they don't match. So let's say um, we'll take let's say Q security. Let's say your central system is set up to Q security is level 40, but all your endpoints are set up at level 50. You would edit it and then override that 40 to say 50. And then when you verify the endpoints, you know what they would match. So either override the settings on when you build the template, or you can have errors that are expected. And it's like, I expect these to be different.
Okay, two ways to do it.
Yeah, so let's take a look. And this is where the SQL Query Verifier, this thing is amazing. I mean, as we all know, IBM has been adding more and more IBM I services so that we can get at system information via SQL. This SQL Query Verifier makes this so easy to do. So let's look at permanent job structures available. This is just how many permanent job structures do I have on this system? And well, we can get that from system status info. It's a column in there. So I set up my query. I can check the number of records returned. Maybe I want a query that returns 0 records. Let's say I want to check disabled user profiles and I want no disabled user profiles. And if I get more than 0, I have an error. You can do number of rows returned. And this one, it's like, well, I want to make sure there's at least 10,000. And if I don't have at least 10,000, I can put out a warning that I do not have sufficient permanent job structures, whatever you might be. Again, a lot of my examples are contrived, but tend to be simple to make the points. So here's one on disabled user profiles, which I mentioned. And so using user info, I just select all of these where the status is like disabled. Sometimes I like using the like just in case that there's blanks at the end, so you don't make sure it doesn't trip up because of something unexpected like that. And here, again, as I mentioned, I expect 0 rows returned. And if I have more than 0 disabled user profiles, I want it to be an error. And then the detailed report will list the results of the query. So here, print this result set of the query to the report. So then I can go review it and I can see every single user profile that's disabled. And maybe I expect some to be disabled, though. User profile service 1 must be disabled. So I could go in here and add columns that this one must be disabled, this one must have, no password errors, whatever you want to check on user profiles. The user profile, the user ID plugin from ARE doesn't allow you to do any of this. But with the user info status, you can, or user info service, you can check on anything you want. The biggest challenge if you have a lot of systems at different releases is which service is available where and what level are you at. That's the hardest part about using the SQL Query Verifier in a complicated environment. Let's see, one more one I'll look at. So I have my own subsystem on this system. And this little one is making sure in my subsystem, I'm verifying I have certain jobs active. I wanted to make sure my QZD, ASO init, remote command server, and I have a pre-start job entry for the spawn jobs. And I wanted to make sure that these jobs are active in this subsystem. So, if you have a critical subsystem for an application and you want these jobs running all the time, you can build that in to say these jobs must be running. All right, so the sky's the limit when it comes to the SQL Query Verifier. The one thing I will say is, let's just go to this one. So here's NetServer. This is a QSys2 share info. You'll hear a lot of people talking about don't share root, don't share QIBM. Until this became available, you had to write a plugin looking at using the Java toolbox. Now with this service available, it's trivial to be looking for shares. This is probably something everyone would want to build into a security verification. And if you see root or QIBM, you'd add your verification here and put out a warning. And so like in this one, we can test it. And I just did this because this is an interesting one. So it completed successfully, no errors. But if we go look at the detailed report, what we can see in here, and again, I apologize for tininess, but the detailed report simply has the result of that SQL query that you did. So if you had run that same SQL query and run SQL scripts, and of course it's wide and tiny, but you would be able to see the same results of which shares and all the information about them. So really nice feature for now that it's available. And I could go on and on here. I mean, I think everybody knows how wonderful these services are. But the combination of ARE with these is extremely powerful in what you can do. We can do custom plugins, and this is where I've talked about writing your own plugins. I have done a number of plugins. In fact, I did the share info plugin before IBM provided the service. So I actually have a little plugin where I use the Java toolbox to get at NetServer share info and wrote a plugin that validates if QIBM or root are shared, and it will report errors if they are. I have a plugin that checks on disabled user profiles, and this particular plugin was done to build in a fix action. So if a user profile is disabled, I can click a button and I can go re-enable that user profile through the ARE interface. And the sky's the limit. In this collection services one, I did this for a client that had hundreds of partitions. They wanted to make sure collection services was consistently configured across all systems rather than manually going out for every one. We wrote this little piece of Java code that retrieves the collection services configuration, checks the settings, and changes it if they're not at the desired configuration parameters, things like intervals. So the sky's the limit on what you can do with custom plugins. All right, and then finally, with plugins, if you need to, and I have one example out here, firmware status, you can pass parameters to the plugins. So I have a little plugin that looks at the firmware status. I pass it a parameter. I expect it to be this level, and if it's not this level, I get an error. And so you can do all sorts of powerful things with parameters as well. But in terms of time, I'm not going to go much further into plugins. I said I'd come back to PTFs, and we'll very quickly do that now because I know I'm tending to run long. With PTFs, you can do three things. If we add a verification, you can check groups from the PSP. This is basically the PTF, the group PTF currency service. So how far behind am I? That's really useful, particularly for your central system where you're setting up that, because that's where your PTF information is primed from. How far back am I from the PTFs that are available from IBM? I can also check PTFs or groups of PTFs that are installed on the central system. So my central system is maybe my master with what the PTF levels that I want to be at. And then I can compare my endpoints to see if they are missing PTFs and need groups to be updated on them. Or I can do a specific list of PTFs. I can say I want ABC123 to be installed on every partition. The powerful thing with a list of PTFs, if we add this one in, is I can look at various groups and I can specify exactly what my minimum and recommended levels should be. So I get more flexibility than compared to just what is installed on my central system. And at the bottom, then I can also expect or check for any specific PTF on any product that's installed. And then there's this other one, add individual PTFs. And you can put a PTF number in here and you can add it in. And here you have the ability to verify that it is not installed. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but maybe IBM had a defective PTF. Maybe you want to make sure that PTF is not installed on any of your systems. So you have a way for ARE to go out and check all of your endpoints and make sure that that fix is not installed on any partition. So a lot of flexibility here again. And then with PTFs, when you run a PTF verification and they differ from the central system, you do have the option to distribute the save files to the endpoints or load and apply PTFs from an image catalog. All right, so we built our template. As you can see, very, very rich features. The default is just to build it. Let's take a look at the template build options. You can see it has a version that it adds. It increments every time you've built it. So I've built this template 57 times. And then you've got these build options. Now this runtime core option, this isn't as necessary today. This is really important back when ARE was first introduced, when when you could have systems without the runtime core. You can build your template so it includes that runtime and then it sends it to the endpoint. I haven't found a need yet because most of the support you need is in the runtime core. But if there are PTFs that come out and the central system is more current than your endpoint system, that's a way to get that more current runtime core out on that endpoint by building the template with that runtime core. I haven't found a need to use this yet, but that feature is in there. And this last one, the build the template where that has been modified. When you have created a template and you go in and edit it, when you build it, it only builds the plugins that you have changed. So if you set up a template that had system values, environment variables, and a few CL commands, and you had been running it, and then you went in and changed the system values, the environment variables and CL commands are not changed if the template itself has not been changed. It only builds the things that have been modified. And I'll show you that when we build this template because we only modified a few things. There is an option to select and rebuild plugins based on the contents of the system. So this is the example. I built the template on April 1st and I changed some things. I want to pick up those changes. I can rebuild the template based upon the contents. This does not apply to every plugin. So I don't view this as a very powerful fix. It's like security attributes, user profiles, but system values, it won't pick up changes. So you can't rebuild those. So I found this of medium or lesser value. I tend to, if I know something changes, I'll go re-edit that template part and just build the template. All right, so then you go into the build template. And when you come in here, you have a tab for every attribute that you have defined in here. So you've got your summary, you can see the file and directory attributes, and you can see what's being verified. I have asked IBM to provide this information via PDF because if I want to go look at all this details and see what I'm verifying in my template, I've got to go back in and edit each page and then come in here and do the build so I can see this. It would be great to have a PDF that shows me what do I have in this template so I can review it without coming in and editing it. But everything that's in here, you can review it before you do the build. And so you can see all the things that I put in here, all my SQLs. And, you scroll down and see the details of every one that you can review. And then once you've decided it's good, you do confirm. Building a template's an iterative process. You do it until you get it right, and then you're going to, at some point, add some things. And then you see all the things that are processed, and then you got to go to the bottom. It's successful, and now we get to the point where we can finally go do a verification. So I spent the most of the time on building the template because that's really the key part, is getting that template set up. But once you've got your template defined, you launch the console. And when you first come in here, you won't have anything but the default group. And there's nothing, there will be no system in here. You have to define what your groups are. To add a group, you can add a group, you can delete a group, you can rename it, or you can make one and you can copy another one. And I have 2 groups. The number of group systems I have access to is actually quite limited. The system I'm on, and I have another one, compliments of Pub 400 people in Germany. Thank you very much. So I have 2 different partitions that I can access. And I have these set up in both of my groups that I have. This group is just a standard group, and this group will actually send email. And I can see I have one that I don't do email. When I'm testing, I don't like to get the emails all the time. But if we go look at this group, and I can, click add here, I can add another system, which I'm not going to do because I don't have another one. I could import. So I have a client that has a lot of systems. They can actually import information from a CSV file for defining all of these things. But let's look at runtime properties. This will answer a couple of the questions that were asked earlier. So first of all, for each system, you have to specify the user ID and password. And the user ID and password may be different on each system as they are for this example. So I have to enter in my password here, and then I have to enter in my password here. Hopefully I remembered what they were. And then I can do my templates. And we're actually going to use this, and you can select multiple templates here, but I don't want multiple templates. I just want to use the demo one that we did today. And then down here, the same thing. We'll use the demo one and we'll uncheck the system health one. And so you specify your templates, put in your passwords. Now, whenever the ARE web server, the IBM ARE web server is restarted, this password will be lost. And so you have to enter the password in every time. But never fear, IBM has helped us out because this was a big pain point for if you have a lot of systems, is you can store these passwords in a local file. It does give you a warning because it's just an encrypted file on disk. So, there's a potential that someone could get to that and reverse engineer that encrypted file. So you have to opt in, but you can store your user and passwords on the server. That way you don't have to re-enter them all the time. You can also have the option to use a default user ID and password for all systems. And so maybe you have a service profile that you want to use for your runtime verification and have that user profile and exists on all systems and have the password the same on all systems. So you don't have to enter in different user profiles and passwords for lots of different systems. You have that option as well. When you have groups of systems, by default, it'll verify 10 at a time. But if you have a group of 50, maybe you want to verify them all at the same time. You can specify how many to do at once. This is for logging of ARE itself. I just leave that at the default generally. This might be something that IBM would ask you to change if you have a problem. And then down here is where you enable email notifications. And so in this particular group, I have enabled email vault notifications. They come from my user profile in this system to my work user profile, and I get emails sent on warnings and higher. You could say I only want the email if there's an error in my verification, and then the ability to test to make sure your configuration is good. So we'll save that. And then here too is where you can schedule. And so if you schedule things, you can go in and schedule reports. You have the option to schedule daily, and you can specify the time, weekly, or monthly. I would like to see an option for more than once a day. Maybe I want to run a certain health check once an hour, make sure something is always there. We don't have that ability right now, but you can run things daily, weekly, or monthly. And so you specify what your scheduling options are. The IBM ARE web server must be running in order for scheduled verifications to run, because that's where the scheduling happens, is in that web server. All right, so now let's go ahead and we'll just verify these systems. Oops, I got to remove that one. All right, now these are the ones. So if I uncheck it, it doesn't run on that target system. So you have to check them, the ones that you want to run on, and you can select all and deselect all. And then you just click verify systems. And it brings up the console here and it shows you the result of the verification. And if I type my passwords wrong here, I'll see that I have an authentication error. but it checks the template version. And basically, so on this partition that's in Germany, it is taken, when I built the template, there's a jar file that's built, and it has all the information that ARE, the runtime on that system in Germany, needs to be able to do the validification in there. And this template is very, verbose. And that's why I would split things out in the real world. I wouldn't do all this verification in one template. But we can then go look at our summary report. And I have no idea why that didn't show, because it is a demo. Something always goes wrong in the demo. So the summary report also has a text-based version. And this is why I can see I am verifying a lot of objects, and I'm having a lot of failures because I put in there the object save, date, and time. Well, saves get done in this system, so the time changes. So I built the template, saves have been done, and now the time changes. And this is not the kind of verification that you want, because I'm getting warnings because they actually did save my information. And so the report has got all the information that you requested. And I really wanted to bring back up the summary. Let's see if this one will show me the summary report. I'll go back to a different way. But we can go look at the detailed report. And the detailed report has all the information about the details of these verifications. I need to get to the summary. It always happens, right? When you do a demo, something always breaks. So let's go back, and we can also review previous results. Okay. And you can see if it's scheduled, you'll see that it was run by scheduled. These were all run manually. Let's take this one. This one is just a reporting thing that shows how, when you do plugins, how you can do reports. And so this is an example of how the reporting infrastructure works. And if you put out infos, they're blue squares, warnings are yellow, and then reds. And so that's just a plugin I wrote that shows the reporting infrastructure. So that's not a good example. Let's see. Here's one. These are custom plugins I've written. Let's see. So here's a set of custom plugins. An ARE, a standard ARE would be the same. It would have the name of the plugin. So if it was system values, it would show it. If it's green, no errors were found. Here, I told you I did the net server file shares. I was checking for read only. This one has read write. I put an error out. And so this is the kind of things that plugins will look at. Let's see if I can find one where, okay, let's see if the summary report, it's the same. There we go. It's the same template. I don't know why the report didn't show for me today, but from running this demo one, this is the kind of report that you will get. And so I'm looking at disabled user profiles. I can see that there's a set of them. Now, there's an issue where ARE is losing fix actions. If I could get to the summary report of the one I just did, there's a fix action, and I could click the fix action button, and I could go enable that user profile. And so let's see, it's net server file shares. Again, this is the same sort of thing. That was the plugin. Let's see which one. PTF verifier. Here I'm checking PTF group currency. So this is saying for this, because I ran this on the central system, and I'm checking the PTF levels with what IBM has with the group PTF currency, and we can now see where we are behind on group PTFs on this system. Very easy to check on that. My SQL Query Verifier. I've asked IBM to improve here because I have all sorts of SQL statements in here, and I think they were going to do it. And I thought maybe they had put out a PTF for this already. Maybe it's not on this system, but it will give you more information, because right here, this is not meaningful at all. I have to go to the detailed report and see what happened with my SQL query verification. System values, pretty easy. You can see here's my system value, here's the expected value, here's the actual value. So you get all of that in the detailed or summary report. And then if we go back on this same one, of course it collapsed it. Now I have to find it again. All right. So we'll go look at the detailed report. I brought this up a couple times, and you can see everything that's in here. If you look at the URL when it opens this in another window, you will see the path in the IFS. And I know it's tiny on the screen here, but what I've highlighted here shows the path in the IFS where the reports are stored. The reports are actually stored in a zip file, and so you can see the zip file name here, and it expands the zip file to pull out the reports when you view them. When you do email, you will get this zip file sent in the email notification to you, so you can actually look at the text reports directly on via your email client, looking at those files. And if you look at the name, then the group that you ran the verification on is part of the name. The date and time that you ran it is in there. It's either _M for manual. If it's a scheduled one, it'll be S. The host name of where it was run, the template name. This is the 14th time that that one was run. It just keeps incrementing. So you've got a lot of information in the path name for where the verification was. And then there's also an XML report. And basically, that's the detailed report in XML format. So if you wanted to take the reports and do some building of something off based upon the XML data, you could do that. And then the download archive. So I said all of the reports are in an archive file. So let's go ahead and download the archive. And we can bring this up. And it's in my downloads folder with all sorts of stuff. It downloads the zip file, and then it downloads, I expanded the report. I can see my logs. ARE log is just the log file from ARE itself. And then I've got the reports, the detailed report, summary report, and the XML report. They're all in text. If you had used the resource collector to collect a save file or put files into a zip file, those would also be recorded and logged into the zip file, and you would have those as available as in this zip file. Also, if you had done things where you generated standard out and you needed that, you'd see the standard out and job logs if you collected those as well. So you get all the information in that zip file. With that, I have a list of notes. The only thing I didn't really get to show you here because I can't display the summary report for some reason. Let's do this. I'll do one last thing. We'll go back to the template back here, and rather than doing this template, let's do a simpler one. I've got I wrote some articles for IT Jungle, and I did this template. So let's run a verification, and we'll only do it on the central system to keep things simple. So let's verify this system again. And I think there's, as I recall, it's tickling my brain. There's something in that template that I did that causes the summary report to not work. And I have to take it out, and I don't remember what it was. And so now there was no problems with it. I'm verifying authorities, commands, and resources. Let's try one more interesting. See if I can, I would like to see if there's one with fixed actions. Let's try Tim's PTF one. Tim, I know, does all sorts of demos too. Let's see what his PTF one shows us. So this is verifying whatever he put in that template. I don't know what he put in there, but checking PTFs. When you verify PTFs, depending upon how you define the template, it can take some time, especially if you're verifying lots of individual PTFs. So we got 10 warnings. Aha, here we go. Tim's template worked for me. So in his PTF verifier, it looks like he was looking for the PTF group currency like I showed you before. Since we can see the actual summary report, this is where the fix action shows up. And the last thing I wanted to show you, when you click fix actions, you come into with PTFs, you have the ability to specify I want to delay to apply. The default is load and apply immediate. I don't think many of us are really going to want to do that. So you can do delayed applied, or save file only. And this is where you have the option to distribute save files to the endpoints. This might be really nice, or if you want to, if you got a small number of partitions, I got 3, let's just send the save files over there and get those PTFs loaded this weekend. And then you can select which ones you want. And then I'm not going to take the fix action because of the system I'm on, but it would actually take and get that group PTF save file on that endpoint system. And so that helps you do things automatically instead of having to do manually, like fix. And so I told you I wrote this plugin that does disabled user profiles. And it's a similar sort of thing. It would show me every disabled user profile. I could select it and then click the button to fix it. And it does a change user profile. It enables it, sets it to expired, and gives it a default password. So that was fix actions that I wanted to show you. So with that, I know we're near the end of the session time. I'll turn it back over and see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Dawn. A real sort of run through so many different options for quite a rich feature set in this ARE. So thank you for that. There are a number of questions. So I know that we are running to the towards the end of the allocated time, but if you're okay, we'll just try and take some of those before we stop today. Okay, so the kind of questions I'm getting, okay, can we schedule a set of, oh, we answered that already, apologies. Managing certificates on the DCM, could that be done through a custom plugin?
You can do anything in a custom plugin. If you can write the code to do it, you can do it in a plugin.
Okay.
And that's, I mean, you could literally do anything you wanted. And so if you knew what you wanted to verify within the DCM, and I know there's a set of APIs for getting at DCM information, you can certainly do it. It's Java code. You do have to write Java, and there is an architecture and a standard way in which the plugins must be done because they extend the base plugin from ARE. But then it's just a matter of writing what you want. You can do API calls, you can use the Java toolbox. So the sky's the limit. If you can do it programmatically, you can do it through ARE.
Okay. Is there a way to compare the central system with Fix Central, IBM's Fix Central, and report it to a spool file?
To report it to a spooled file. So the way ARE's Fix Central does it today is it's what we saw here in the summary report, you would have a text file. It isn't a spooled file. This would be in a text file, the detailed report. So if we looked at it here, it would look like this. And that is, you can see this file is in the IFS and you can see where to get to it, but not via spooled file. If you wanted to have it in the spooled file, then you would have to do something either with a command interface, well, SQL Query Verifier, but that doesn't do it to a spooled file. If you needed it in the spooled file, you'd probably have to do something unique in a plugin.
Then the other question we had was, are the usernames and passwords saved in a safely encrypted way? And Mark has also commented that he created a request for enhancement a couple of years ago, which is in uncommitted candidate state. So I don't know if that is something you know anything about in terms of
so there were actually several RFEs created regarding the user ID and password for running verifications. I think there were at least 4 or 5 RFEs out there. Because this was a big pain point, especially if you had multiple partitions, having to enter that password, user ID and password every time the ARE server was restarted. Especially if you do daily, I know I'm working with a client, they do daily backups and go to restricted state every day. And every morning entering user ID and password for 100 systems was a non-starter. And so IBM did deliver this ability to save it. I do not have the details on the encryption that is used. So all I know is that it is an encrypted file on disk where that user ID and password is saved if you choose to use that option.
Okay. Thank you. There are some more questions. I will just like to tell people about the next webinar, next two webinars that are coming up. The next one is on the 19th of May. At 2 p.m. UK time again, same time as today, where we've got Jackie Lynch, and she's going to be covering top tips for successful administration of VIOS. So I hope you can tune in then. And then the following one is 9th of June, and that for that we've got Doug Mack, and he's going to be talking about DB2 web query for IBM I. So I hope you can join us for both of those. They're at the same time as today, 19th May and 9th of June, and I'll send info with the replay email that I send out. There are many questions, Dawn, but one of the ones that has come up a couple of times is Ansible replacing ARE? I don't know if you have any comments on that, or we can take it offline afterwards.
So I've actually had discussions on this very question. I am not deep into Ansible. I've read about it. I've seen demos on it. I've never used it myself, so I'm not a deep expert on it. It is my opinion based upon what I know that there is overlap there, but there's a couple things that I like about ARE. And this is, everybody has opinions, and my opinion is clearly going to show through here. I like that it's an IBM I product. We're doing things with the IBM I partition. We can do things very easily because it is, and it knows and understands I. It's built on I. And Ansible, being an open source solution, may have some of the challenges in that how do we get everything that we need from an I-centric perspective? Because from an ARE perspective, ARE can do anything you want it to do. Ansible can do what it does, and I don't know how extendable it is because I've not really investigated that. It's free. It comes with the operating system, and it is easy to use. I mean, I think we walked through everything today. It is simple. So there's overlap, and in environments where you have more than IBM I, Ansible might be a very important solution. But if you're very I-centric, my opinion would be to lean towards ARE. But again, there might be others that are more familiar with Ansible that would be able to give them a bit of different perspective on it as well.
Thank you. I would like to stop the recording for now, and then we'll take a couple more questions after that, if that's okay with you.
I am fine if you want to add, if people have the time, if you have the time, I'm available to continue to answer questions.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for now. I'm going to stop the recording.